Afrocentrism, Mythical Past and Imagined Homes by Stephen Howe, narrated by Eminem Join Wadi. Part 1, Ancestors and Influences. Chapter 1, Race, What's in a Name? The arguments over Afrocentrism, like the closely related ones which have reoccurred under different names for decades, are about history and culture, mentality and psychology, literature and linguistics, sex and economics, about Africa, Europe, America, the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. But above all, they are about race and are conducted in the language of race. They invoke, sometimes overtly, sometimes in a kind of code, beliefs and theories about racial or ethnic identities. Theories of race and ethnicity are, of course, always claims about human group difference. The essential distinction is between those which see the differences that matter as being physical ones, and those which conceive of them culturally. Nowadays, we usually describe the former as theories of race, the latter theories of ethnicity. In the post-war world, especially in the West, and especially among liberals, there have been a powerful tendency towards the second language, to talk of human difference in terms of ethnic groups rather than races. The shift had both a directly political motivation, above all to refute the race science of the Nazis, and a scientific one asserting, in essence, that race is not a biologically, genetically, anthropologically, or sociologically meaningful concept. This latter proposition, denying that the language of race has any scientific validity, was given the official imprimatur of the United Nations in the post-war UNESCO Statement on Race. But the change to the language of ethnicity has not necessarily wholly served the link with biology, for it is evident that lurking behind many usages, scientific, popular, and bureaucratic, of the discourse of ethnicity are ideas about physical rather than or as well as cultural differences. Beliefs about physical differences have also, quite obviously, involved ideas that they correlate to characteristics other than the purely physical. If this were not the case, there would be little interest or controversy about distinctions between humans, which are mostly rather minor and, in the case of the most observable ones, literally superficial. Why would anyone care that some of us are hairier while some of them have shorter noses? In fact, claims about physical variations have constantly been linked to claims about differences in behavior and capacities. Above all, of course, in intellectual capacity and or psychological disposition. It is this association which has made it difficult for many of us to believe that ideas about physical variations among human groups could even in principle be neutral, objective, value-free. It is still less easy to accept that claims about psychological difference could be value-free. Recent controversy over Charles Murray and Richard Herrnstein's book, The Bell Curve, 1994, has provided a striking new instance of how any such claims seem inevitable to carry strong and disturbing moral political overtones. Statements such as science does not recognize the existence of race, however, induce their own kinds of skepticism, and these may be increasing in the 1990s. The sciences most directly concerned with these issues are generally thought of as clustering towards the soft end of the intellectual spectrum. Those least able to produce clear-cut and definitive results with least consensus about methodology and the conditions of proof, most susceptible to subjective, emotive, or ideological coloring, psychology, paleoanthropology, archaeology, let alone history, cultural anthropology, and sociology. And there has been a widespread increasing recognition that science in general can never be simply and wholly value-free knowledge. A wide range of studies in the history and sociology of science, together with relative theories such as those of Thomas Kuhn or the more extreme skepticism of Paul Feyerabend, have accustomed most observers to see how external considerations, from the ambitions and emotions of individual researchers through the protocols of professional institutions to political ideologies, condition what scholars believe. Three further kinds of influence have advanced the climate of skepticism. One is the critique mounted by social theorists, especially feminists, post-colonial polemicists, and to some extent Marxists. A lesser extent because classical Marxism both inherited the Enlightenment belief in scientific progress and rationality, and sometimes proclaimed scientific status for itself, directed at the gender, racial, or Eurocentric, class, and other biases frequently inscribed into what has counted as scientific procedure and proof. Second is an environmentalist critique, urging the negative consequences increasingly attendant on scientific and technical progress. This is sometimes linked to what are often called New Age philosophies, which advocate the replacement of scientific thought by more spiritual, more humanistic, or conversely less specious, more holistic worldviews. Third, a cluster of postmodern, post-structuralist, and textualist approaches, taking their methods and assumptions above all from literary theory and from particular currents of mostly Franco-German philosophy, subject all claims about scientific truth to racial doubt. And their more fundamentalist forms, they assert instead that any such claims are merely rival narratives or discourses, none of which has any greater true value than any other, and none of which can be founded on anything outside itself. All these controversies have had especially powerful resonance in the United States, with strong consequences for our main themes here. The USA is, it has often been said, not only an exceptionally multiracial, but an intensely race-conscious society. The categorization of and terminology for different racial groups have constantly been altered. As a moment's thought about the histories of people at different times labeled Indians, whether they are Pueblo, Pawnee, or Punjabi ancestry, will suggest. But the central object of the obsession has always been distinctions between black and white. This has heavily influenced the way issues are apparently distant but emotionally charged as the racial makeup of ancient Egypt's population have been discussed. Chicago University Egyptologist Frank Yurko rather plaintively moaned. When you talk about Egypt, it's just not right to talk about black or white. That's all just American terminology and it serves American purposes. I can understand and sympathize with the desires of Afro-Americans to affiliate themselves with Egypt. But to take the terminology here in the United States and graft it onto Africa is anthropologically inaccurate. Quoted in the Sousa, 1991:119. An earlier generation of Afro-American scholars tended to share the same skepticism. Veteran popular historian and ebony editor Lerone Bennett's view of ancient Egypt is typically guarded. If black people were a major element among the peoples who fathered Egyptian civilization, who were the Egyptians? The question bristles with thorns. The only thing that can be said with assurance is that they probably were not Caucasians. The evidence, which Bennett then goes on to summarize in an even-handed way, suggests that they were a black, brown, and yellow-skinned people who sprang from a mixture of Negro, Semitic, and Caucasian stocks. Bennett, 1984:7. Such a presentation, with all its admitted uncertainties, probably represented a scholarly consensus at the time among those who had given the issue thought, and Bennett noted the variety of physical types and skin hues in which the Egyptians depicted themselves, while quite reasonably also pointing out that all of them would have been forced in the 40s to sit on the back seats of the buses in Mississippi. Bennett, 1984:7, but in his mild caution, a view like Bennett's or Yurko's seems increasingly irrelevant to the present-day U.S. storms over racial identity and African legacies, storms in which ancient Egypt and its people's possible skin colors have a surprisingly important role to understand why we need to go, if not quite so far as the Egypt of the pharaohs, then certainly far back and far away from the modern United States.